Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Doug Piper. I hope everyone is doing well and getting ready for the upcoming holidays. I want to welcome you to Gourmet Brewing, and I also want you to know how happy I am that you're spending a few minutes with us today. We've got a fantastic event tonight. It is a super hot topic, brewing hazies, and we're going to talk about the science, the tips, the tricks from the brewmasters themselves. So I want to bring everybody up on screen, so hopefully successfully, and this takes a moment, so I ask for your patience. I wish it were faster. There we go. I think we have everyone on screen now. So our special guests today are Dave Bergen, John Harris, Chad Henderson. So, hey guys, just quickly, how are you doing today?
Real good, Doug. Thanks for having me.
I'm doing pretty good. Just early out here on the West Coast.
I'm doing great. Thank you again for having me.
Excellent. Well, this is going to be fun. We're going to be exploring the science, tips, and tricks of hazy beers. But first, let me let you know who these guys are, because we've got some pretty exciting folks on screen today. Dave Bergen is the co-founder and director of brewing at Joyride Brewing in Edgewater, Colorado. Now in their 6th year of operation, Joyride specializes in patio beers and IPAs of all kinds. They've recently added their 15th additional to their much-lauded Experimental IPA series, which is aptly named the IPA Experiment. Their flagship is Joyride Double IPA, and it is a neighborhood institution that has been one of the top sellers for more than 5 years. Now, John Harris is an Oregon craft brewing icon, and he's been in the industry more than 30 years. And after brewing at McMennon's, Deschutes, and Full Sail, John opened his own brewery in 2013. Ecliptic Brewing unites John's two passions, brewing and astronomy. An ecliptic is Earth's yearly pass around the sun, and his brewery celebrates this journey through the seasons with food and beer. And I think I said that wrong. It's an ellipse, correct, John?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
I'm getting a lot of echo, just so you know.
On my end? Everybody getting lots of, how about Dave, are you hearing a lot of echo from me? Nope. Okay, Chad, you're okay? All right, so John, you might double check. You may have more than one tab open. Check your Chrome browser for more than one tab, because it will drive you crazy, I promise you. So let's move on to Chad Henderson. Chad is the head brewer and co-owner of Noda Brewing. After years of aggressively home brewing and pursuing any opportunity in the craft beer industry, Chad made a connection with a couple of others with similar passions who ended up inviting him to join a project they were embarking on called Noda Brewing. It's now in its 9th year, and Noda has received multiple awards, including several GABF medals and a coveted gold at the 2014 World Beer Cup for an American IPA, which is now their flagship IPA. Although Chad views himself as a brewer with a wide focus on styles, the brewery has gained a reputation for putting out excellent IPA varieties, and recently featured a hazy, juicy IPA as a year-round standard that has become the company's second best-selling beer. Chad is focused on expanding his team's brewing abilities through new research in the IPA brewing process. So we've got quite a lineup today. I can't wait to get started, but just a few quick announcements I'd like to jump with first. So I'm going to put you guys back there, and John, that'll give you a chance to work on that echo. Hopefully you'll have some luck there. So for those of you that are new to us, this is Gourmet Brewing, and we have free events that we do each month where we talk to subject matter experts on beer and other fine beverages. This is our 57th event, and I have to give a big shout out to our supporters because these events are all totally crowdfunded, and because of them, these are free to you. We don't sell anything, or we're not going to close with some special opportunity. The majority of our supports comes from a very special group that's our community in Patreon. And they're truly the reason we're able to deliver this content for free to you. So if you're interested in supporting Gourmet Brewing's programming and becoming part of the solution, I encourage you to drop by our Patreon page. You can find it right there by clicking on the green box, which is hopefully showing up in the center of the screen. So what people typically do is buy us a beer each month. Another way you can help is simply by clicking on the follow button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Easy as that is, it's sort of like YouTube. And my speakers, when they check out whether they want to appear on our program, they look to see how many followers. So when you click on that, you don't get spammed, you don't get email, you don't get anything except it drives that head count up, and it improves our chances in getting big speakers like we've got today. If the webinar is not playing correctly, refreshing your browser window fixes most issue. You can reduce the resolution of the program by clicking on the gear in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. The Ask a Question button. I see 6 of you had already found that. We're going to get those in the second half of our program. I also have a poll there, and help me plan going forward which speakers or topics you would like to hear from. It's really quick. You just vote. There are 3 different polls, and I'd love to get your input. And so, now that we've covered everything, we're going to jump back into our main presentation, which is why we're all here. So welcome back, everybody. I appreciate everybody's time today. Now, we're going to start with Dave Bergen of Joyride Brewing and hear about tips and tricks. But first, we are going to jump into that Hazy IPA that I asked everybody that was interested to go ahead and jump into it. And we're going to do a kind of commercial calibration with it. So everybody got their Hazy IPA? All right. Well, let's get that poured. And I'm going to switch to the side camera while we give that guy, hopefully, a nice pour. And why don't you guys just talk and let me know kind of what you're perceiving when you're drinking it.
Sure, I'll start off. So I actually had this for the first time yesterday. I missed it, during its initial rollout. One of my first reactions to it is I picked up, breweries will develop that house flavor, and I definitely, when I smell and taste this, it still speaks Sierra Nevada to me. And so I'm not sure whether that's, some of the similar hops that you've come to, love in Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, a lot of Cascade, whether it's combining yeast. I'm not sure what they're doing in there, but that was one of my main feedbacks, is it just really kind of reminded me of a stronger, hazy Sierra Nevada Pale.
John, your mic is muted, I think.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Technology, I'm trying. I get a lot of that kind of stone fruity aromas in the beer. I get a little of that citrus that Dave was referring to. But definitely, I think it's kind of citric character in the beer, and maybe some stone fruit. But it's just a really clean drinking hazy. It's, for the hazy style, it's right on the bottom of the haze you're looking for on a hazy. It's not. I've seen ones that are a lot more hazy than this. That's for sure. We're not talking milkshakes either. We're just talking hazy IPA. So, but every brewer is different at how much haze they want to see in a beer.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is some commonality, like Dave said, with sort of notes from the Sierra Nevada Pale. But I definitely love how there's a soft aroma to it. The aroma tends to, I think, present itself as a very soft floral character with citrus notes, but then there's a huge stone fruit characteristic. That's the most predominant flavor I get off it. But the overall impression I always get from it is that it tastes really safe. And I don't mean that as a negative thing at all. It tastes like a beer that can travel well in this hazy category, which is a hard thing to do. And it doesn't have too much haze. It still retains some haze. It still retains some of that fruity character, but nothing's like walloping over the head with, like super citrus or anything like that. It's just nice, soft stone fruit, nice, easy floral character and little citrus notes here and there. But overall, a very approachable beer. Light on the mouthfeel too, which I think is nice.
It seems super balanced. I mean, it's exactly what the label says. I mean, it's a hazy IPA. Now, you could probably debate whether the bitterness is truly in an IPA category, but it is so just smooth and it's just a great beer. And I understand that it is fast overtaking the pale ale at Sierra Nevada, which is kind of amazing.
I don't think any beer would complain about that.
Well, and that's why we're here, isn't it, John?
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, Dave, you're going to kind of lead off our discussion, and we've got one of your beers that we're going to talk about. And John and Chad, we're going to come back to you guys in just a few minutes, if that's okay. All right, Dave, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's fun to be here. Fun to be drinking some beers. We the four of us have kind of traded beers amongst each other the past couple of days in preparation for today. So there's been a couple of Ecliptic and Noda Hazy IPAs in my fridge that I've just had to stare at and haven't had to crack open. So it'll be really fun to open those for the first time with these guys and also get a little bit of feedback on ours. So we'll see where it goes.
Well, I think I have gotten this thing ready to pour. It's an interesting label that you've got there. And I do have the right one, right?
Your camera is currently off.
It is.
I just have the Gourmet Brewing logo on there.
Oh, okay. On my end, I'm thinking it's okay. Let's say
I see the glass in the
cool. Might just be on my end then. There it is. I can see it now. Yeah. Right. So the ale, pale ale series is something we started maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and what the intention of it was is essentially just to be an experimental pale ale series. It didn't start off being a hazy pale ale series, but probably 6 or 7 out of the 9 iterations of it have turned out being hazy. And so for this one, I decided that we were just going to make it a hazy series from here on out. We're a smaller brewery here in Colorado. We're I think last year did around 1,400 barrels. So canning wasn't ever anything that was really on our radar until the pandemic hit, and then we've been able to pivot quite well and move a lot of our production into cans since we can't have it on our premise anymore. We have a facility that can hold about 280 seats normally. Can't get nearly that number right now with all the restrictions. So canning for us has been a brand new thing. And even though it was something I never really wanted to do, it's been something actually really fun to get into. But it's taken a lot of my time as far as working with the art direction, making sure that we get it lab tested before the artwork is due so we can get accurate ABV numbers on there, and then scheduling the beer to where it can be canned at a time where it's still going to be pretty fresh. So we canned this beer a week ago today, and you got it yesterday, right, Doug?
I did.
Yeah, so it doesn't get much fresher than that.
It's fresh squeezed. I'm telling you.
And so with this one, our designer is one of our beer tenders. Her name's Kelsey McCalla. Does awesome work for us, and she really wanted to go 80s on that label. You mentioned that particular label. She hadn't done one that kind of had like an 80s vibe to it, and I was just like, yeah, go for it. I'm a big Beatles fan, and so since it was version number 9, I kind of had like a Revolution number 9 idea in my head, number nine, but how do you put that on, visually? I don't know how you do. So really happy with how that one came out. It's something that's just going to really, jump out of the, liquor store shelf, or, when people are getting to go from our brewery. And it looks great in the official Joyride glass there, Doug. I've got the same one. Fancy that.
Well, thanks to you. And it is a beautiful and quite an unusual glass.
Yeah, this is the Revival glass. This is one that we've been using for hazy, or all of our IPAs and hoppy beers, I think, for at least 4 years now. I think we probably switched over this for our hop forward beers, 2016. It's one I really like. Not only is it practical for a tap room situation where it stacks pretty well, but kind of consolidates the aromas right here towards the top. Goes out just a little bit, let them escape. Also allows for easier drinking. So this is kind of one of my preferred beer drinking glasses at home, as well as at the brewery. So, yeah, and we really like this beer. It's selling quite well right now, and even with the limited capacity that we have at our breweries, and it's ale, yeah. And so we got that name. One of my friends, his name is Mark Cribbett. He came to me one day and he said, "I got a really good beer name for you." And I'm, "What's that?" He's like, "It's ale no." And I'm like, well, "That's good, but I'm going to take it. I'm going to make it more positive. Instead of no, I'm going to add the yeah onto there." So that's how that was. That's how that was introduced.
Well, I love that. Now, the profile is quite a bit different than the Sierra Nevada hazy little thing. I'm getting some pretty significant pineapple. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I was just finishing off the last of my Sierra Nevada in there. Now I'm cracking my own so I can taste along with you there. So there's a couple of different hops in this one. Normally for experiment beers like this, I try to keep the hop build to only 3 or 4, so you really get to know what the individual hops are going into it. For this one, let's see, we had 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 6 different hops in this one, so it's hard to sometimes tell what individually everything's going to be doing. But it starts off with a heavy charge of HBC 586, which is an experimental hop. And we originally got to play around with this for a little bit over the summer with a couple of beers that we made, and really, really liked it. Wanted to bring it back into some other beers that we were making. Main things that we're getting out of it. I mean, I think it's a mango guava bomb is what that hop is. Also brought in a little bit of cashmere, which I think brings a lot of that pineapple that you're picking up. And then also dry hopped with a little bit of lemon drop. I think it has a little bit of a lemon custard on the very back end. Also in the Whirlpool has a little bit of Hull melon and Mandarina Bavaria to kind of get more of that kind of mandarin orange and melon flavors on the back end. And so typically that's how we build not only our hazies but our West Coast style IPAs, is that we'll have a different idea of what we want to achieve in our Whirlpool versus what we're going to put in our dry hop, versus if we want to do something outside of that as well. So that's kind of how we decided to layer that particular beer, is kind of start with that kind of very citrusy at its base, and then layer that kind of pineapple, lemon on top of that. Oh, and I forgot Mosaic, because you can't have a hazy without having Mosaic in it these days, it seems.
Well, I was going to get out just quickly your other two beers. Did you want to talk to those right quick before we get into kind of discussing your tips and tricks?
Sure. Duke of Lizards was a beer that we debuted this year. And the batch that you have is the fourth batch that we've made of it already. It's a combination of Strata and Simcoe, and trying to use them in different ways. Kind of the tips and tricks. I might be veering into that, talking about that beer already, but we're trying to use it. What we're aiming to do with the Simcoe in that beer is to try to extract more of its passion fruit qualities rather than some of the piney, danky that it can sometimes have. And so one of the ways that we're doing that is using a decent charge of it in the Whirlpool, as well as having a good dry hop addition of it early in the dry hop on day 2. And so, I can't do the math really quick in my head, but we're a smaller brewery, so several pounds of Simcoe on day 2. And what we're seeing through the biotransformation is it's turning some of those pioneer characters of Simcoe and turning them more into that passion fruit peach. And then we're using Strata in the Whirlpool as well, and then we dry hop heavier with Strata closer to day like 8-10, and that's going to give more of that like candied peach ring that's in that Duke of Lizards.
Now that's a new one on me. I like it though; it's very descriptive, and I get almost no pine on this.
Oh well, so are you drinking the Lizards or the Aelia still? I can only open one at a time. Yeah, the Aelia. Yeah, we the hop selection for that one was really just to be citrus, tropical forward, for this particular style.
Well, I thought we might get into a little discussion here because we've got some expert brewers here. And John, we might start with you. Do you have a question on your beer that David's been talking about?
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm liking the oats level you talk about, getting that creamy mouthfeel. I'm digging that a lot. And I just had an awesome burp. I mean, it was just a great burp. And if you have a really good burp in a beer, I mean, I know it's kind of weird, but it's an awesome moment where you're like, that was great, which is very rare for a burp. You know what I mean? So I just papaya. I definitely get the papaya flavors. I think it's really delightful, to be honest with you. So. But a good burp, sorry about that, but it's just
no.
Burp, it was like, wow, that smells great.
Yeah, it's funny how that has become part of the description process especially in hazies, of how good of a hop burp you got out of it. So compliment taken.
Yeah, and the blend really works.
I can see that being added to the BJCP requirements.
Yeah. That could be its own category, burp judges, and just
the post mouthfeel part.
Hey, maybe it's the next show we do burpers. No, I'm just kidding. No, but the hop blend is crazy hop blend, but it's really throwing a really, like I said, the tropical papaya thing. It's really cool.
I hate to say it, but I didn't get the package. I was hoping to get it today, and it didn't arrive, unfortunately. And I had all my guys looking out for it, but it did not come. I'm sure he's probably going to show up tomorrow morning, like right at the beginning. But the beer sounds fantastic. It looks good too. And I'm happy that you used cashmere, and I look forward to trying that because that's a hop that I try to play around with, but I haven't gotten a good amount of testing with it at this point because we don't contract for it, but we've gone through Crosby hops for a couple of boxes of it, and I love the smell of them in general. And I've had beers I've really enjoyed with it. I love Mandarina in any Whirlpool edition, whether it's a hazy or a West Coast. So I can't wait to try it for that alone. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Sounds great.
I'm sorry you didn't get it, man. I feel bad.
It is what it is, and we were pretty slammed around here today. And I kept checking we only have one spot to get delivered, and I just was assuming it was going to be here at some point, and unfortunately it didn't arrive. But that's the way the COVID world works sometimes.
Yeah, and talking about cashmere, I think it can also have depending on how it's used, can also have a slight coconut aspect to it, not as heavy as what you get out of, say, like Sabro. But I do think that it can have like a little bit of a light amount of coconut on the back end.
Yeah, that's what I like hops that add like subtle nuance of something unique. I'm personally not the biggest fan of Sabro, and I know that might be blasphemy to some people. I think it's a neat hop, but I find it very rarely something that I want to use as a forefront, because I think it is so heavy in like the coconut character. So I like the idea of cashmere adding that subtlety to it. So I hopefully we'll get to use some of these in a test batch soon.
Yeah, that's the thing about Citra too, is that Citra alone sometimes is just too much, but it's a great just complementary hop,
Absolutely. And that's how I feel about Mosaic as well. As Mosaic is the perfect tag team hop. I feel like you can just throw that with almost anything, and it just kind of adds like layers of nuance upon it.
So Dave, I know not every brewer either feels like they're that skilled with hazy IPAs. How would you summarize someone that's trying to brew a hazy to encourage them, or a tip or a trick that you've got just in summary?
To get people to drink hazy, or how we're sorry, you cut off on my end just for a second.
I'm sorry. I was speaking of brewing them.
Oh,
we have a lot of brewers in the audience.
Yeah, we I think hazies have come a long way in the past 4 years. I think maybe 4 years ago, a lot of people were just throwing in like a lot of stuff without maybe thinking about how everything was going to interact together. And I think what brewers are doing better right now is really being intentional with what they're trying to do, whether that's saying, all right, I want to start with this and then finish with that, or using things at certain times in order to utilize biotransformation. And so I think that doing your research on what the hops are going to do, playing around, like if you have a test batch system, doing things like that where you're like, okay, well, how does this hop and this hop interact? I don't have a test batch system. My test batch system is my main system, which is 10 barrels. So everyone gets to drink my test batches with me. But if you're lucky enough to be a bigger brewer with a test batch system, then you can kind of play around before you bring everything to the market. It's almost become a little bit of a joke. I think someone made a meme out of it the other day of putting it on top of different posters for Hallmark movies, but you can't go wrong with a Citra Mosaic combination. So you can always start there and then and tweak it from tweak it elsewhere.
I totally saw that meme, by the way.
Well, Dave, cheers. We're going to move on into John's, and thank you very much for the delicious beer. I'm enjoying it, and I'm going to keep working on it. But we've got John's to move into next, so don't go anywhere. We will hear from you again in just a moment. Chad, we'll see you in a minute. And John, you're the man.
Howdy.
So I'm going to pour your beer, hopefully successfully and without spilling it, and maybe you can talk to it while I'm doing that.
Gotcha. So I want to thank Dave for one-upping me with. So, oh, you have an Ecliptic. I did send you a glass. Wow, I didn't think I sent one into you. I'm very glad to see that glass there. I just thought, we should have sent a glass, and then, oh, there it is. So Phaser. This is pretty much it's about the second hazy IPA we made. We brought it out in 2018 as a seasonal in January. It was like one of those crazy moves where it's like, let's just throw a hazy out there, see what it does. And what it did was it sold as well as what has now become our flagship Starburst IPA. We did a lot of trials on this beer prior to getting it to first thing be hazy, which is easier now than it was in the early days when people are trying to figure out that some yeast just didn't work. But anyhow, so back to what phaser is. So phaser is a combination of a lot of the hops that you heard mentioned already, Citra, Azaka, which is Roy Farms exclusive hop, which stores lots of pineapple. Got El Dorado, which is a newer variety, stone fruits, and of course Mosaic, which everybody talked about already. So, so the idea here is we're just trying to get a kind of a nice tropical melange of the hop flavor. Using the London 3 ale yeast, which is the predominant hazy yeast that most people use, because that's its original name. Other yeast banks might have different names for it now, but I think the one we use is called Juice. It's juicy. So we're going for that hop juiciness. We're going for the 6.5 easy drinking alcohol content. I know it's kind of weird saying 6.5 is easy drinking, but it really, in the eyes of crafter nowadays, I think that's a pretty moderate alcohol content. Like I said, and then just throws a nice little haze. This is definitely a little bit more hazy than, say, the hazy little thing we started with. We're definitely trying to go for a more opaque look, but not quite to the milkshake level. But we wanted to have a good haze. Oats, we flaked oats and gelatinized oats, and we used some flaked wheat, and to get the haze forming proteins that we're looking for when making the hazy, to keep that matrix. And then it's dry hopped probably around day 6, and just depends on how the ferment's going. And we do a pretty large dry hop on it. And in the past year, we've invested in a new dry hop device, which actually we put the hops in a hopper and CO2, and it actually macerates the hops into just a powder, and then recirculates the tank. So once we got away from getting on top of the tank and dropping hops and then just crossing our fingers that maybe these hops would dissolve, we now make sure that we can get a really good mix of the dry hops in the beer, and that's really added to the flavor characteristics of Phaser and Starburst and other hoppy beers we make. This is that stone fruit.
Yeah, it's more piney than I think either of the other 2 beers that we've tried so far. And a tad more bitterness. Do you have any idea what the IBUs have ended up at?
It's around 45 IBUs. Yeah, Phaser is, honestly, we did that on purpose. We wanted it to still retain a bit of an IPA.
Right.
And a decision, well, it works. It's our second best-selling beer, so it's working. But we wanted to still have that reminder that you are drinking an IPA, but not to the point of what the West Coast were, say, 7 years ago, and 80 IBUs was a normal, hop charge, and so but it's definitely bitter, which is coming from the hops, not the yeast. Early trials of hazies, we did different methods with different, leaving it unfiltered, leaving more yeast in suspension, lots of things we did over time that we've kind of gotten away from now that we've kind of figured out hazies better. It's still a very yeast dependent.
That's a sneaky 6.5%.
I can't remember what Dave's was, but
yeah, really sneaky, very, very nicely brewed. Well, do you want to? You mentioned a couple of tips and tricks. Is there any others you want to mention before we bring the other brewers on?
It's just the yeast strain is really the key. I mean, when we first started doing this, we were using our house yeast, which is 1056 Chico Classic Sierra Nevada yeast. And we would get one to haze and one wouldn't haze, and I started talking to some of the brewers, pilot brewers down the street at Widmer. They're like, "Oh no, that won't work. It won't work with it. It won't work with 1056." And we found that actually, if there's a drop of 1056 cross, say you cross, with London 3 a little bit, it takes over, and we don't have that problem. But if it's 1056, it's not going to haze up. But if it's London 3, it will. So really, it's yeast strain dependent. There's only a couple that really work that we found. So you're kind of locked into that. But I'm encouraged to hear more about other strains that could help that biotransformation, that matrix. We'd like to add our we'd like to get through most of primary fermentation before we put the dry hops in. That's kind of how we've done it. I know other brewers, Dave mentioned adding at day 2. We recently added a 2-barrel pilot system into our plant, so we can now actually start, instead of doing 15 barrels at a time, we can start doing 2 barrels and actually play around with some different hopping regimes. So I'm looking forward to doing that.
Well, speaking of playing around with them, I've got your other beers there on screen, or I thought I was. There we go. Did you want to talk to those at all?
Sure. I mean, I sent you the phaser because that was our only hazy right now. We don't have any other hazies out right now. So I sent you a true gift, a Russian River collaboration, Pinot Noir barrel-aged Belgian-style golden ale. And this was a collaboration in the 2019 that we took and laid down in some Pinot barrels with Brux, and let that age for about 10 and a half months. And we bottled that and did a very little draft of it. But that's a nice Brett beer. Turned out really good. It was definitely this is probably the second Brett beer I've really done on with a larger batch, lots of barrels, and it was a bit unnerving, sending it to Vinny Chilurzo and saying, okay, well, Mr. Brett, I hope you like it, and luckily he did. And we're actually going to lay it down again this year and try to improve on it. So I'm pretty stoked about that. Filament's our winner IPA. We've been making that since 2013 when we opened. This year we decided to throw a twist at it and throw some tangerine in there from Bergen fruit. And I wasn't sure how it was going to be received, but it's being received really well, actually. And we just wanted to change up Filament. We've done it for the same recipe for so many years. So we thought, let's just liven this up with the tangerine. So it's got a nice citrus character from the hops. We're using what do we got in that beer? I'm trying to remember all the hops in the beers we have. It's like, but it right here. What do we got in here? We got Crystal and Mandarina Bavaria, like those were mentioned earlier, which still a bit more of that orange character themselves. And then we also have some Centennial in here also, which is just a classic citrus. And then the Sedno, that was a tiramisu stout. It was brewed, imperial stout brewed to taste like tiramisu. So we got just the different flavors. There's no milk in there, of course, but we actually have ladyfingers in the mash. Cold brew coffee we do in house. And it's just a nice, it's a huge dessert stout. It's really what it is, but definitely it's a mouthful for sure. But I figured some cold day this winter, you guys might like popping that open and enjoying it. But
I actually had my birthday this week. I think I may jump into this guy.
if you can get some tiramisu to drink it with it and eat with the beer, you'll be really happy.
I will do that. Well, John, I'm going to bring the rest of our brewers on screen. Is there just kind of a summary of tips and tricks that you would say and recommend to somebody that is trying to improve their game?
I would say start with a known yeast that's going to give you the ability to get the matrix. Experiment with, especially on a homebrew scale, if you have different additions at different days in the fermentation. When we have 90 barrel batches of stuff cooking, we're less inclined to trial stuff like that. But if you have this way to do more hop experiments, like I say, we have the ability to do now with our new pilot system. We'll start playing with those things too, and play around with colder Whirlpool stands. Drop your Whirlpool to about 180, so you're still above pasteurization. So you're gonna and you'll leach out less bitterness. That's a lot. We've been playing with that a lot. We did that this summer on we call it Sunray Juicy IPA, and that actually worked really well. That was pretty popular, and it was a totally different character than our other two IPAs. So those are some things, and don't be afraid of the different high protein adjuncts and how they can help change your beer, like the Dave's beer with 15% oats. I mean, that's a lot of oats, So, just those are a few things.
Well, as we think through some questions, Chad, now I hope you got this beer.
I did. It's very delicious. I think it's a care package. I look forward to trying all these. Not tonight, but at some point. But beer's fantastic. I got early morning tomorrow. The beer's fantastic. I really do like the extra piney / quasi resininess to it, because I'm a big fan of still being able to kind of get that bitter tingle sensation. And when we go to my beer too, like it's there in that one as well. It's almost like it's a bright pineapple. if that makes sense. Like you get the fruitiness of pineapple, but you also get kind of like a sharp pithiness of it without it being like a astringent or anything like that. It's almost like as if you bit into a pineapple and you get that meatiness to it. It kind of transfers over into like a semi-resiny and piney character. With that also then lends into like the bitterness, and also the lacing on the beer itself is just really nice. I love a beer with good lacing on it. Color is awesome. The color is exactly what I try to go for on it, where it's like it's opaque, but it's not looking like you're gonna have to floss your teeth afterwards. And it's awesome. And I totally agree with you. London Ale 3 is the way to go with the yeast. It's just that's the workhorse for any of our hazes that we do.
Yeah, for a long time we were just leaving it unfiltered, and one day we'd always thought about running it through our centrifuge, and eventually we said, "Well, let's give it a go," and we did. And what we found was that, okay, now we've made the beer.
If you have the right proteins in there, and the right biotransformation, and the right yeast, it holds through it for sure.
Yeah. So and then the beer just kind of upped its game a little bit when that happened last year. We've made Phaser better. So
I feel it increases shelf life a good bit too. Have y'all found that?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
When we did it with Radio Haze, we would lose any sort of like stratification in the cans, and we were getting a couple weeks to a month or so longer on shelf life, depending on storage and stuff like that from centrifuging. So that. It sounds so nerdy, but that was like one of the biggest like geek out moments. We're like, we fully centrifuged the hazy, and it's still hazy. like it was like a cool thing. So
you're totally paranoid. You're like,
yeah. Oh yeah, we had it set up for a bypass. If it started coming out clear, we just shut everything off. So,
transfer.
Hey, Chad, I'd like to ask a quick question. You mentioned shelf life, and we did an earlier program on some IPAs, and shelf life really varied. Could you speak to shelf life? And I'd love to hear everybody else's input on that.
The shelf life is the single biggest crusade I think I've taken on in the last 5 years for IPAs personally. I would say 95 to 98% of all of our QA issues that we have are from poorly stored cans that go too long on a warm shelf. It is beer dependent and it is style dependent. I have some beers that, especially with hazies. Hazies are the weird ones for me. There's a stigma with hazies that they have a really poor shelf life, but I think that's more so how you brew the hazy, because our normal year-round hazy has a longer shelf life by a little bit over our year-round West Coast IPA. And when we did the talk for the Denver Rare Beer, we did a collab with a hazy, and that beer seems to only get better over time. We still have a couple of kegs of it laying around, and like months down the road on draft, it's like still getting better somehow. So I think it is kind of beer dependent, but basically as far as a bulk, any sort of hop driven beer needs to be drank as fresh as possible. I think there's, even if you have some that can last the span of time, you're still looking at a much smaller window than a lot of other beers. Even like lighter lagers can really trek a lot further down in timeline than most hazies or West Coast IPAs in general. So you always try to look at the bottom of the date code, and also try to look for it in the cold aisle if you can. The colder it is, the longer it stays.
I can't read it from here, but
yeah.
Dave,
Speaking of looking at the bottom of the can, this one has 1125 on it, so I think we're okay.
Yeah. You're right.
Well, I did send the freshest that we were canning that day.
Yeah.
It is really hard though on a business aspect, because your salespeople want to be able to sell the beer, and like, well, how long is it good for? It's like, well, it depends. Are you guys going to put it out in the middle of the floor? Are you going to put it in the cold room, or how cold is the cold room? Because it can literally double in lifespan depending on how it's stored. So, it's very difficult to get the seal of approval on how far you can go without buying back beer if it sits for too long. But it's one of those things where I think that with public education, if they just know to start looking at the bottom of the cans for hop derivative beers, it's just going to make everything a lot easier. So,
agreed.
Dave, did you have a quick question before we get John to kind of summarize his tips and tricks?
I was just going to say, for shelf life, it's something that we're still learning about on our end, because it's something that we are just starting to do for canning. Typically beers will only last for 2 to 5 weeks at our place when we're serving it on draft. But my general rule of thumb for IPAs is I like to drink them within 30 days. Within 60 days, it'll be okay. And even if a brewery says it's good to 90 days, I typically don't like them after 60. And I can really taste it where I'll be pouring it and I'll be like, so something's going on here. And my wife will kind of give me like a crooked eye and be like what? Like, I'm like, it just tastes a little old. She'll look at it and she's like, it's 62 days old. And I'm like, yeah, I told you. But that's generally my rule of thumb, but it's based off of what you're picking up as well. That, if, don't necessarily knock a beer because it is 61 days just because I just said that, because most brewers who know what they're doing are able to keep that pretty shelf stable. But John, yeah, this is pretty good, man. Good work.
Thank you.
Enjoying it.
It's crazy too, is that we got a trademark on phaser, like no problem, which I was really worried about. I figured Star Trek would come after us on that one, but approved. So I'm like, wow, we got phaser. I love Star Trek.
So John, how would you summarize brewing hazies, just quickly, before we move on to Chad?
Well, I mean, get the right yeast strain, get your good mix of other proteins, either oats or wheat, or I don't recommend rye because rye sticks your mash like a. But just extra, matrix of proteins that give you that the biotransformation. Serious dry hop load. You're going to have to throw some money at it, but it pays off with the flavor you're going to get and the different, just the tropical or the citrus or pine or whatever you're going for. And don't be afraid to try new hops. You know what I mean? Like I purposely, when making phaser, we decided that it can share a couple hops with Starburst, which is like Mosaic, but it has to have some other hops. We don't want to just take the same hop flavor and move it on. So always make sure if you're doing a new beer to move your hops down the road. There's definitely enough out there now to differentiate your beers by using different key lead hops. But of course, like Chad mentioned, Mosaic's kind of like the little super super glue of tropicalness in any hazy.
Well, thank you, John. We will come back to you in just a moment. We're going to switch over to Mr. Henderson. So you guys hang on, and we will see you in a moment.
I'm shifting around here. Yeah.
Well, I have one of your beautiful beers here ready to pour. Would you like to describe it while I attempt to do that?
Absolutely. First and foremost, the answer is yes, I am actually this pale in real life. So this is a year-round hazy. This beer is really special to me. It's honest to God probably the most. It's probably my favorite beer that we do on any sort of commonality. I drink it personally more than just about anything we put on. This beer has just hit its year anniversary for release. We released it, I think, in the beginning of November or so, or the end of October last year. It is our second best-selling beer, and I spent about a year of R&D trying to figure out how to make it. The goal that we had with this beer wasn't just to make a hazy IPA, because we have been doing that for a while as some limited releases and limited can releases, mostly through the tap room. We wanted a beer to basically be our kind of local craft version, local version. Sierra Nevada is craft, but kind of like our version locally here as our kind of answer to hazy little things. As in, it's a beer that you can find in lots of places in the greater Charlotte area, now in the Triangle area as we expand out. And it's a beer that hits all those hazy marks, but it's also not going to break the bank. One of the things that I think that was kind of off-putting people that were trying to seek out hazy beers is a lot of them, they just go so overboard. And a lot of the ingredients, the cost of the beer is relatively diminishing. So you have to price it so high to even break even on the beer itself. And then they're really limited and all that sort of stuff. And we had been doing beers like that. And we're like, okay, we know some general concepts that work, but we want to make a beer that we can rest our hat on, that we can make year round consistently and have all those things we want out of a hazy IPA, but not go any higher in cost than our normal IPA, which is our hop, drop, and roll, which is not a cheap beer to any degree, but we looked at it as simply like we could either really blast that out of the water or we could keep to that as our standard for it. So basically I spent a year trying to figure out what we had to get and what we could kind of draw the line on as far as like, okay, we don't need to go to this level of extreme. And a lot of it was derived from research that a lot of smaller people than me did, particularly Dr. John Paul May did a ton of hop research, specifically with biotransformation. And a lot of the key points that took away from his talks were not only the type of oils that we needed to look for biotransformation, such as geraniol, linalool, 4-MMP, nerol, things like that, but also how they interact with the types of grain that you put in, specifically trying to increase the amount of prolamine you get out of the grain. And prolamine essentially is a protein substrate that's in all cereal grain, but it's in very high percentage in wheat and it's in moderately high percentage in oats. And then also coupling that with the enzymes necessary in specific types of yeast strain, which our house hazy yeast strain is the London Ale 3. It's just a workhorse of a yeast strain. It just absolutely kills it every time. And we can have horrible pitching numbers on it and it just runs through it. It's really, really versatile yeast. But basically we came up with like the idea that we need to have specific biotransformative oil rich hops, which in this case, this beer is, I would say the main two hops in it are Citra and Mosaic. Surprise. But I chose those because they were specifically pretty high in linalool, geraniol, and they had a decent amount of nerol in them too. And then there's also a significant complement of Centennial and Chinook in it, which are really high comparatively, at least to other hop varieties that we had in stock of 4-MMP and nerol as well. So the idea was to have this all-encompassing idea of those four main biotransformative oils that could be representative in the beer. Now, the thing that's really interesting too, when you look at like why do they have to throw so much hops into the beer, is when you look at the percentage of the oil complex in those beers that are linalool or geraniol or nerol or 4-MMP, they're so small. A lot of times they're not even reported on. You know, like you have to ask a hop provider, like, hey, how much 4-MMP or nerol is in this? You know, because you'll get only like 2-3% in an average hop of linalool, and you'll have 47% myrcene in it. You know, but myrcene is going to fall out with hop flocculation or with yeast flocculation for the most part. So we've basically nailed down that we need to have high prolamine. So this beer is actually mostly derived in it's like 55% base malt, and then we use torrefied wheat and wheat malt for about 35% of it, and we use about 10% of flaked oats. And a lot of the flaked oats I like with the prolamine addition to hold those oils in place when the biotransformation is going on. But also I just think oats are really nice to have in a hazy because it just accentuates mouthfeel. And for that reason alone, I think it's got a place in it. But we've been able to make really consistently hazy beers with basically driving on wheat as opposed to just tossing tons and tons of oats in it, which is great for our backs because on our 60-barrel system, we have to manually throw those oats into it. We do use a small amount of Chinook on a first wort on it because I do like having that little prickly back end, like I said before when we were drinking the Phaser Hazy. I like to have a little bit of a back and forth. And that's me personally, but also when we were doing tasting panels with different test batches, we weren't getting negative responses from people from when we did just dry hopping or just Whirlpool and dry hopping. We were just getting people remarking that they liked the fact that there was a little bit of a bitterness that came in when we would do like a first wort or something like that. So there's a small charge of first wort of Chinook in there, which I still believe to this day Chinook's the most underappreciated hop on the market. And then we throw a small charge of Mosaic in the Whirlpool, and we run it over 100 pounds of whole leaf Citra hops in the hop back. We dry hop on day one, so at high Krausen, which I think is also really important for the biotransformation and also just the haze factor. I've dry hopped while knocking out, and I've dry hopped late in the fermentation, and I haven't gotten as consistent of haziness, but I've always gotten really good biotransformative flavor. So, you know, a lot of people that want hazies really do shop with their eyes. So while I don't really think that the haze dictates the quality of the beer, a lot of people expect that when you mark a beer out to be a hazy beer. And yeah, so we basically said that we had to have at least 3 pounds per barrel dry hop. So we did 3.5 pounds per barrel, about 55 to 6% of that's the Citra Mosaic combo, and the rest is the Centennial and Chinook. and it's on London Ale 3. And I couldn't be happier with it. It's 100% centrifuged. It has a relatively decent shelf life considering it's a hop forward beer. And we run a ton of tests on it. So we kind of torture test all of our beers through heat saturation at 95 degrees storage just to see how they can deal with the time under the heat and kind of like force age them out. And yeah, the name of the beer comes from, we have this long-standing relationship with a great radio couple that are really into, they're not a couple, but there's a couple of guys called Woody and Wilcox here in Charlotte. And they've partnered with us with multiple different beer projects. And the last one that we did with them, we were like, this isn't just going as well as we want to. So when we started this one up, we tried to keep the radio theme in there. And so we went with Radio Haze just to kind of make it like a static haze concept and just made it this fun, wacky can to go with it. And they love it. And it's, like I said, like you said, it's our second bestseller almost immediately out of the gate. So it's been fun. It's one of my favorite beers to brew, and I get nervous as crap every time because I just hate if the lauter starts going south on it and all. I would recommend rice hulls as a tip for when you're brewing hazies. They can get a little sticky.
So the haze on this is phenomenal.
Thank you.
I mean, it really. I think I'll have to line them up, but just looking at it when I poured it. It appeared to be so. Has that actually been centrifuged?
Yes, sir. 100% centrifuged. And we run it kind of tight too. But that's the thing when you have the whole idea of the proline proteins is they really bind to the polyphenol oils in the hops, and those little tiny oils that you're trying to get to biotransform. And that's the thing that you kind of have to unteach yourself, I think, when making West Coast to the Northeast style or hazies or whatever you want to call them, is that you're trying to go for things that actually make up only a small type of the hop. You know, there was recently this year a big talk on biotransformation for specific sulfurs that were not able to be quantified until recently, and I have a whole light low calorie hazy that we're releasing as a year-round next year. Or I remember we're releasing next year as a fairly large release, if not year-round, that is almost completely derived off the idea of using polyfunctional thiols, which is they basically haven't been able to quantify until just the last year, and that's and that led to a whole nother like types of hops that were really predominant. And they can give huge passion fruit sort of characteristics. Simcoe is actually one of them that's in like a high percentage for polyfunctional thiols. So, you're constantly discovering new techniques and new ways of quantifying flavors that come out of dry hopping. And yes, you can, as a brewer or a home brewer or whatever, just throw random hops in. I made a beer. It wasn't random throwing. I meant to do it, obviously. But I did a beer that was dry hopped almost exclusively with Cascade. And people swore up and down it was Citra or Azacca or something like that because it smelled like straight up grapefruit. And I was like, no, it's like 80% Cascade. And it's because the Cascade that we had a really high amount of geraniol. And when you get geraniol biotransformed, you get a lot of beta citrulline, and it smells like, grapefruit extract almost. So like I think you have to retrain your mind. From West Coast idea is like you take the hop, you rub the hop, you're like, all right, that's what I want to get in the beer. We're gonna use this. Whereas in the hazies, you can't just take the hop, rub it, and smell it and be like, that's going to work great. You have to look at it on a much deeper level. And that's really hard on a homebrew level, especially because a lot of times you don't have access to that information. But hops genuinely have, every lot and farm crop of Citra is going to be different. But there is some commonalities that are going to be in there. So you just kind of have to try to get as much information as you can and make sure you have the right proline base for the grain that you're throwing in and the right yeast to do it. And you should be set to go. And have fun with it.
So, Chad, I'm going to interrupt you for just a quick second. So it is the top of the hour, and I know a lot of folks maybe limit themselves to 1 hour. You guys are going to continue on, right? We're going to go through and get to the questions in just a minute as soon as we finish our discussion. Now, John Harris did have to bug out, so John won't join us, I don't think, for any more of the event unless I see him pop up there. But for those of you that need to run, it will be recorded. If you want to jump in there and pose a question, even if you leave, we will jump in and answer the question. I say we. It's going to be Chad, and it's going to be Dave, and I'll just try and add some probably dumb questions to there. So for those of you who need to leave, I understand it. So we're going to jump right into it. Chad, as we wrap things up in your session, I wanted to touch on some of the other delicious beers that you sent me. We live nearby, and so I've certainly had a lot of the hop and roll, but I have not had the hoppy days. And before we jump in, I will have to say, it looks like John is there. Okay, so good. We'll bring him on as you talk to that.
Yeah, so the Hop Drop and Roll is the one that we won the 2014 American IPA World Beer Cup with. That's been kind of the beer that's the beer that we really bonded with. It was our founder, our vice president, his homebrew recipe that we just tweaked over and over again to try to get into what we really wanted to do. And we kind of did it in limited volumes at first because we just didn't have the hops ready when we first opened up, and it just took off. And it's been the workhorse for us. It keeps the lights on, and it's an awesome beer that we really lose a lot of sleep over it again because we're just trying to push as much out of that beer as we can, trying to make the hops shine as much as we can. And it's at 7.2%. It tends to fade pretty fast. And we're just really trying to use as many techniques with different oxidation techniques and stuff like that to try to push as much shelf life as we can with that beer. Hoppy Holidays is our winter IPA, kind of like the filament that John sent over. That is a West Coast style IPA. It uses Citra, Centennial, Amarillo, Chinook, and is heavily featured with Simcoe and dry hopped with Simcoe because of the pininess in it. It is a West Coast style, and it also I bought an absurd amount of spruce tips from Colorado, and we have them sent over to our friends up in Boone who do distillations, and they distill spruce oil out of it, and then we inject it in the bright tank. So it's basically a Christmas tree as a beer, because who doesn't want to drink a Christmas tree with alcohol in it? But it's definitely it's been super popular for us. This has been the best selling year for it. Of course, I joke with it and stuff like that, but it's awesome. It's really good. I get weird cravings for it. It's like I don't. Once you have it, you're like, I kind of want to have that beer with spruce in it again. It's weird. It's an odd sensation. It pairs really well with the Simcoe too. That pininess of the Simcoe and the resininess that it comes with just works really well with that spruce pop. So
Dave, I know you get the first question, but I wanted to ask one. Chad, did I hear right that you said because it was a 7.5% that the shelf life is more difficult? Did I hear that right?
It's 7.2. It's not necessarily because of the alcohol. I was just trying to generalize it easier. Just basically saying the malt bill on it is so aggressive. It's not quite to an imperial or anything like that, but it's an aggressive hop bill on top of an aggressive malt bill. So the minute that the hops start to fade out, the malt bill is not really there to be the star. The malt bill is there to provide the alcohol and provide the stage for the hops to do what they got to do. So when the hops start to fade out, it's not as pleasant of an experience because you have this big, bold beer underneath it. And I think that really helps because most hazies tend to be a little bit weaker in ABV than your typical West Coast IPA. I mean, not by a lot, but a little bit. But then when you look at the dry hopping ratio, it's an absurdly higher amount. It's fine for a West Coast style IPA to have anywhere between a half a pound to 2 pounds per barrel, and it's pretty much the standard to start at 3 pounds per barrel on a dry hopping for a hazy. So when you have a beer that's not relying on a bunch of at boil hops or bittering or anything like that, and has a malt bill that's basically just trying to give alcohol and then a lot of grain that's just there for mouthfeel and prolamin and things like that.
Nowhere to hide.
Yeah, exactly. But when you have like a hazy, when you're doing like a very clean malt bill, it's just base malt and then adjuncts. There's not a lot of flavor there to begin with. There's a lot of mouthfeel and haziness and stuff like that. And then you have the front payload, so that can fade down a little bit before you're like, I'm not a fan of this anymore. Whereas on the West Coast ones, you have all these different hop additions throughout the boil and the Whirlpool, and you got bittering charges, and you have specialty malts, and they have a lot more in general. I'm talking in generalities, and in our case in Hop Drop, there's a lot more malts that give flavor to it. So as the hops fade out, the malts and faded hop flavors together don't mix as well as it ages. So it's a difficulty for us, but you know it is our darling child, so to speak. So we'll take it for its shortcomings in that one spot for all the wonderful things it's given us in the past. So.
Well, it's certainly the way I discovered Noda, and I also want to thank you. A lot of BJCP meetings have been held at your brewery, as well as judgings, as well as some beer judging events. So I do appreciate that with Noda. I live close enough by that I take advantage of that. So, Dave, did you have a quick question for Chad?
I was going to say, I actually really like how you explained how the higher alcohol beers aren't necessarily always going to work. In my opinion, if you guys separate them into categories of hazy pales, hazy IPAs, hazy doubles, hazy pales are actually my favorite out of the three, and maybe that's the reason why, is because they're going to last a little bit longer with the fallout that you talked about. Except that my second favorite are hazy doubles, and so I don't know why that, why that makes sense. And maybe it's just the intensity thing or whatever. But I really, for me, I'm like a sucker for like a hazy pale ale, more than anything else. And then if I'm going to look at like an IPA, I tend to more look at like West Coast styles for whatever reason. But I'm really, really drawn to like hazy pales right now. But this is excellent.
Thank you.
I'm really enjoying that. As far as I like how you also described how everyone's going to be ordering with their eyes, just like, at a restaurant, you eat with your eyes first, make color. It's exactly what everyone's going to be looking for at this point. So cheers.
Cheers, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. It's just this is just a tasty beer. It's that simple. It's just lots of nice flavors. You learn more about proline in the last hour than I have. No, but I mean, I like how you're taking it. You're delving deep in the science. I think that's pretty cool. Just to try to find out what's making what happen, and that's the one thing about this style that I think a lot of people miss, is that there was a lot of people before us that actually figured some of this stuff out, or are still figuring it out. Obviously, you are, and I'm learning a lot just from listening to you about that stuff. So, but this is just a really just solid, just hazy IPA without question.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate you saying that.
Yes, because.
Well, I think
I only have one can, though. That's the problem.
So just as we wrap things up, before we move into the questions, I thought I would line these up as best I can, and see if you guys notice any difference, want to comment on them. We'll focus and bring that up full screen. So, any comments you guys want to make comparing your beers?
I drink that Flight.
Yeah, I mean, they're all pretty comparable in haze, it looks like to me.
None of them look chalky or like they would form sediment too, which I think is a big thing, and is the consistency of being able to hold the haze. I feel like if you're going to get fallout, or like if by the time you get to the bottom of the glass you have sediment in it, that's a problem. But if they look that nice and they stay that nice, even if you for some reason left it and you came back and they looked exactly that an hour later, and or a week later, then that's a good thing.
Well, I think the Haze Award would go to you, Chad. As best I can tell from here, you've got the most haze, if there were such a thing. They're all delicious, and the fascinating thing to me is the differences. Dave, yours is very juicy, and of course it's, I think, the freshest of all of them, but they're all just a week or two old. But yours is just really juicy. And Chad, yours is delicious too. I love the aromatics on it. Yours is not quite as piney as John's. John's probably has the most resin character to it. But Chad, yours probably has a little more bitterness bite. John, I would say yours is second. And, Dave, yours is just really smooth. They're all extremely drinkable. So I'm going to enjoy all these a little later on if I can get the camera to switch properly. There's a scary thing.
That's a good background.
There we go. How about that? So
just to say real quick, my favorite thing about hazies is how you just said that they all taste so different and they all look so similar. So it's really the style that truly showcases the power of hops.
Totally.
Well, it does. Well, let's move into the questions, if you don't mind. We have 14 questions, and unless people have directed a name, I'm probably either going to make my best shot at it, or I'm just going to pick somebody. So our most popular question so far, and for those of you in the audience, if you want to prioritize one, look in there, and everybody gets one vote. So if you want a question answered the soonest, you can jump in there, choose a question, and push it up to the top. So here's the question. I'm going to think about who to maybe direct it to. I am frequently asked my opinion about having bittering hops added in a New England IPA. Oftentimes, only late addition hops are used. What is your opinion about bittering hop additions in a New England IPA? Some of my favorites use no bittering hop additions at all. Chad, why don't you start with that one?
I think it's I think you need to judge it on your audience, our tasting panels, and also people just around our area immediately. I've done a bunch of talks actually with different homebrew communities between North and South Carolina, and I almost every time get someone that says, "Hey, yours and so-and-so's beer has a little bit of bite in the back end," and I love that. Like, what's that from or whatever? And I'm like, well, I add a small charge of the first wort. And the charge of first wort that we use in it is 5 pounds of a Chinook in a just short of 2,000 gallon batch. So that's a really tiny amount per volume. You don't have to have that. If you want to just rely on any IBUs that you can pull from your Whirlpool, you can do that as well. But you also, without trying to go heavily in it, like I really want to do something. I don't know what sort of strings I can pull for it. I want to have a discussion in some larger forum that we need to revisit the idea of IBU, because especially with the hazies, when you have oxidized beta acids and dry hopping and things like that, there's a lot of things, especially in the hazy world, that are not quantifiable by normal calculations. And you can sit there and say, like, we technically have a 5 IBU beer, but if someone drinks it, because of the rate that you dry hop it at and all that sort of stuff, it can be way hoppier by perception from it. I would honestly just make what you like, and as long as, if you're a professional brewer, I would do what your audience likes, and that would be it. I would you do what you're proud of and do what sells well for you. And at some point you have to cut pride. If you think it's the best beer in the entire world and no one's buying it, you have to you make that call. But I like a little bit of back end bitterness in it, but I don't do it for every single beer either, for that matter. So it just depends on what you want to go for with the idea of the beer and what the audience is trying to ask you for.
Dave, yours was the least hoppy. Can you just briefly touch on an answer to that question? Did you add any?
Yeah, absolutely. And mine was a pale ale compared to 2 IPAs, and so you'd expect that to be a little bit lower to begin with. But we were also designing that to be lower IBU, just because I feel like for where we are, it's where what people are expecting. That if you're going to be making a juicy hazy IPA, you're expecting that to be a lower IBU or smoother IBU. And if they're looking for something with a little bit more of a bite, then we offer them one of our, West Coast style IPAs or West Coast pale ales, or something that we're doing kind of in the middle. And so for that particular beer, we were just steering that in a different direction. I think that, right now, in my opinion, overall, people looking for juicy hazy are looking for lower IBUs, than what they're going to expect out of a West Coast style. I'm more of a West Coast style myself. Out of preference, I drink everything. But so I like that little bit of bitterness that's on the back end of, both these other examples that we've had today. But I also feel that again, dependent. I think Chad said it's based off of your audience and what they're looking for. But yeah, it's it's definitely an interesting topic, and the different ways that you can get IBUs from different compounds and betas and everything. It's how we like to portray it at our brewery is perceived IBUs instead of measured. And so we kind of just we'll take this one, and we'll go like this, and we'll be like, all right, is this one more bitter than this one? And then we'll adjust the chalkboard based off of that. And that's how we pretty much will figure out our IBUs. And we get everything lab tested, but we like to do everything on perceived.
So John, I want to shoot the next question to you. And Joseph, by the way, thank you for that question. So the next question is from Dimitros. For the Hazy crew, have you tried or considered replacing a portion or all malted wheat with malted spelt in the grist for a New England IPA?
No, I mean, I've not seen malted spelt, to be honest with you. I've used some spelt unmalted before in some beers, some Belgian beers, but I'm not really familiar with malted spelt, honestly. I mean, in these days, I mean, trying to find the next great protein, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to trying it.
Chad, how about you or Dave?
We've done some spelt before, but it was because we were trying to make like older world recipes for like saisons that we're going to funk up later on. I don't know the stats on spelt. If it's high in proline, then I absolutely would try to use it. And we have a source that actually does malted spelt here in North Carolina. It's not a large amount, but if it has anywhere close to the amount of proline that wheat has, I would totally try it.
Dave, any experience with spelt?
Yeah, same here. We've used it in saisons, especially ones that we're going to be sending into barrels later on, just because we feel that it's going to leave something for the Brett. But I kind of view it in the same wavelength as rye, that it has a little bit more flavor to it than what you're going to find out of wheat or flake barley or oats. And a lot of times for these types of beers, we other than the protein and haze and the alcohol, the grain is almost like an alcohol delivery vehicle. And the grain's more of an alcohol delivery vehicle. So it's, and for hops. So it's going to be introducing a flavor that I don't necessarily want to have in there. Spelt has like a little bit of like a nuttiness to it, and something that I feel would somewhat be distracting for what we would be trying to do for these particular beers. But I'd love to be able to taste something that has that, and maybe it really works.
So you'd be cautious with it.
For this style of beer, yeah, I like it more for saison.
Belgians.
All right. So, Dave, why don't we get you to take the next question? Next question comes from Jacob. Have you ever used Kavik to ferment New England IPAs? And if so, what's been your experience, and what would you do differently if you were to try it again?
Good question. Yeah, we've used Kavik, I think one time in one of our hazies this past summer. It was really, really cool. I think what we would do differently moving forward is probably let it get a little bit hotter. I think that we maybe put the cap on it maybe a little too low, and should have just let it run more of like how it wanted to run. And Kavik wants to run really, really hot, and it has no problem getting up closer to 90. I forget exactly where we put our cap on it, but I thought it was really cool. There's a big manufacturer near us here in Colorado where their flagship Hazy IPA is, I've been told, is using Kavik for their yeast strain. And I think it makes a great product. And you're going to get a lot more of that orangey character depending on the yeast strain that you're using out of it. So, yeah, I think if we were going to do it again, it would just be let it run hotter.
Yeah, I'm actually fermenting something with Kavik right now. Anybody else doing anything with Kavik quickly?
We meant to this year, but with COVID, everything got out the window. So that beer actually got axed. So maybe hopefully next year. But now I have the 2-barrel pilot brewery, so I can play now, which is cool.
All right, so we're going to move on. Chad, I assume you don't have a comment there.
No, I have made pretty high diligence of trying every Kavik or Kavik or however you want to say it. Apparently, there's like multiple ways you can say it depending on your dialect. I haven't been sold on it completely. We did one small pilot batch with it that we weren't really happy with, but the way that we're running right now, until we get we're selling our 15-barrel system and getting a 5-barrel in to test some stuff out and run test batches until we get that up and running. I mean, I never say never to anything. I always want to brew a new beer and try something new. But yeah, we haven't really experienced much success with it so far. But we haven't also tried that much with it either.
So, Chad, why don't we give you the next question? This one comes from Adam. Are there any concerns with pH in hazies, especially as compared to other styles?
There is concerns with pH and mash, I think, because you're using such lighter grains that tend to not reach your pH optimally. We haven't had that much of a problem with appropriate salt additions with it, and we haven't really experienced anything pH-wise that would be detrimental to the beer. I think you should always concern yourself with pH on every beer, really. It's just at some points, depending on the style, you have more concern than another. But we basically always monitor pH on it, especially during fermentation. But so far, none of our hazies have given us any sort of concerns or red flags or anything like that with pH being too high or too low, for that matter.
All right.
That wasn't that very creative of an answer. I'm sorry.
No. I think it nails it. Thank you, Adam. That was a good question. John, why don't we do this one for you? DT, and this is all I have as initials, he asked favorite Whirlpool temperature.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just off record real quick. I noticed that Terrence Sullivan from Sierra Nevada is online, so we've been monitored by the mothership. Hello, Terrence. Good to see you. I'm assuming that's the same Terrence. I mean, we played with Whirlpool stands, like I said, this summer with our Juicy IPA Sunray. That was our first real foray into like lowering that temperature, and we had to do some repiping of our heat exchanger to be able to get that done. But we liked what happened with it, and we're actually starting to do some trials with like Starburst, our main IPA, to see what else we might be able to get out of that. Those lower Whirlpool stands. But for most of us, I mean, we're still at just below boiling. But like we're starting to play with those though, and like so these are some of the things that we can do now that we don't have to test brew 15 barrels in a batch. We can actually test brew much smaller batches, and actually not. What are we gonna do with 28 kegs? We don't like it, It's like so that's right. But I know a lot of brewers in Oregon. Just discussions with other brewers here in Portland that a lot of people have gone to the 180 stand for the Whirlpool. They've moved away from the just below boiling stand. So either they'll brew higher gravity in the mash tun and add back, 5 or 6 barrels of cold water to the Whirlpool, or they'll just try to somehow finagle that down through the heat exchanger and get to cooler temperatures. So
Chad,
lot of
any
brewers
comments on Whirlpool temperatures?
If you have the ability to drop it, depending on what your setup is, I think anywhere between like 170 and 180 is awesome. I think that one thing so on our 15-barrel system, we would try to do is essentially a really quick sanitation run, at least via hot water rinse, to try to get the vessel really heated up, just to negate anything if it was to go too low in temperature for microbe development and stuff like that. It never really did, but we would just do that as a precaution. On our big system, on our 60 system, like the way the pipe work runs in it, I've done it a couple of times, and it's just an absolute headache because it just Whirlpool's so slow the way that we have to repipe our heat exchanger in to actually accept the wort through it that it almost negates the idea of it because it just takes so long to push it to Whirlpool. We try to run the water dosing and the cold water dosing, and that also didn't work as well as we wanted it to. I love the idea of it, but I've only been able to achieve good results on it on a smaller scale system. But usually we try to gun between like 170, 180. What we do now on our big system when we run our when we cast out our wort from bulk kettle to Whirlpool, if we do have a Whirlpool edition, then this is across any beer. Even if we have a Whirlpool edition of our blonde ale, we throw our hops in basically in the last couple barrels on a 60 barrel push. So it's basically just catching it in the last little whipping of it before it actually like settles out and whatnot. So it helps for not pulling too much IBUs, but you can definitely pull a lot more oil concentration if you're going under 180 and not pull the IBUs from it.
So Chad, we're going to give you the next question, but since we have Terrence online, I'll bring up and never let everybody see kind of the lineup. So there's our 4 hazies. So I'm not much of a hand model, so I'll have to apologize to that. So clearly, this is our Sierra Nevada hazy little thing. This is our Joyride Ecliptic. No, I said it wrong, didn't I, John? What is it?
Ecliptic.
Ecliptic.
Phaser.
And then we've got Nodas there at the end, the radio haze. So that gives us kind of a comparison there. I'm going to turn off your cameras just briefly so everybody can kind of see the colors without any interference from the system here. So interesting lineup of very fresh. All of these hazies are less than 2 weeks old, I believe. And so nice comparison and beautiful glassware, everybody. So we will jump back in and continue the questions. And I think, Chad, we set it up so that you were moving into the next question.
All right.
So Sean asks, what are your sweet spots for percent of adjuncts?
I would say on oats, I like to go between 8 and 12%. I know that's pretty narrow, but and I honestly just use 10% as most of the time. But when you're brewing on a 60 barrel system, it's really easy to round up or down by the bag. So I give it 8 to 12 percentage thing. For wheat, I try to have malted wheat be anywhere between 15 and 20%, and I usually have torrefied wheat. Which, if you don't know what torrefied wheat is, essentially like popcorn kerneled wheat. It's essentially what it's wheat that's puffed to where when you run it through the mill, it is pretty close to flaked wheat. And when you're throwing a ton of bags of oats and rice hulls and stuff like that, you don't want to throw a bunch more flaked wheat bags. So if you have the ability to do flaked wheat, just do that. But I usually run that between like 10 and 15% as well. So that's the way I like to try to combo it up. So you get a lot of wheat characteristic. You get, and I really like having that rustic wheat. I have no data that says torrefied or flaked wheat works with Prolamin better or anything like that. It just every time we use it, it just gets a little bit chalkier. It tends to hold on to the oils from what we can tell from sensory a little bit more. But I would rather have like 4 parts malted wheat, like 2 to 3 parts torrefied or flaked wheat, and then 1 to 2 parts oats, essentially, if that makes it more simple, which it probably doesn't.
John, do you have a comment on adjuncts in hazies?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we've used lots of flaked oats, lots of flaked wheat. We don't use so much malted wheat really anymore in the hazies. We kind of stay away from those because we don't get the same haze effect, we don't think. So though some of our beers have some malted wheat in them, but mostly we're using the flaked wheats, flaked oats, lots of rice hulls. Yeah, I forgot that earlier. Definitely, rice hulls are your friend in these beers. I mean, one day we didn't have any, and it was a really bad day. But yeah, definitely working into the 15%, 20% range of the grist for the mash would be good. I haven't gotten to 50% yet on any of ours so far, even though that's a classic American wheat beer to go to 50%. But being they're flaked and they're not malted, it's kind of scary a little bit. But
so, John, we're going to give you the next question. Bill Metz asks, is there a dry yeast available that works well for hazy IPAs and biotransformation?
I mean, honestly, I haven't used a dry yeast and I can't remember. Professionally, I've never used a dry yeast, so I'll punt to the other guys in case you guys have used some dry yeast. I haven't. We've been liquid cultures forever. So
same here. We use Y yeast for our London Ale 3. We use White Labs for most of our other stuff. I'm sure there is something out there. Most of the yeast from White Labs and Y yeast have a comparable dry component for it. So I just haven't shopped for it in next to a decade or plus. So I would just look into it. I'm sure there's a bunch of forums that say if you want a dry version of London Ale 3 or something like that, I would definitely run for that.
Same here. We use a liquid yeast from a local yeast company here called Inland Island. But yeah, we haven't used dry in a very long time.
There's nothing wrong with using dry yeast either. It's just usually when you go up to a certain scale point, is your predominant companies that you go through tend to provide liquid yeast for it. So yeah, it's nothing wrong with using the dry yeast on it.
No, I mean, early days, lots of early brewers, especially in California, like San Francisco, they were using dry yeast all the time. 1056 just dried, and it made good beer.
Good question, Bill. Chad, we're going to shoot this one to you. Gary asks, has Hazy IPA always been in the background, and why the recent blooming of this style?
It has not always been in the background because when we started out, it really wasn't in the scene here. I remember when Heady Topper came out and people were starting to bring it to the brewery and started to like compare it to Hop Drop and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't understand why they say drink it from the can. That's ridiculous. And then we pour it in a glass and we're like, oh, it looks like crap. This is awful. You know, so like we're like, that's why they're doing it. They don't want you to pour it in a glass or whatever. And like, so the idea of a hazy IPA was just like, well, they just screwed up the batch. You know, so like at the time that we were starting out, we didn't really think of the idea of doing an IPA that wasn't clear. But you know, we changed that up obviously. You know, when it became a big. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Sounds like a roll-up door.
It's a pallet jack that had to get rolled out. Sorry. Whatever, staff had to grab it real quick. I've been alone here for quite a while, and someone had to come visit. Anyways, so it was not always in the background, but when it became a style, it definitely became a thing that we wanted to try at least, because we had a hard time accepting it at first, and I personally had a hard time accepting it at first because it seemed like everyone was just trying to make the beer look bad as opposed to make it taste awesome. And I had a problem with that. I was like, we've had so many kegs returned because the first pint poured was slightly cloudy. You know, we could have started this whole style. Yeah. And so yeah, I took almost not a personal offense to it, but I was confused by it because we had been lambasted if we ever had anything but a perfectly clear IPA. And then I started tasting. It took about a year or two after it became something available here in North Carolina, where I started saying like, oh, there's some of them out there that I think are really, really, really good. And that started the whole conversation. Like, there's some that are really juicy and awesome. Let's try to figure out where that came from. And so I don't remember when we exactly started it, but it was probably like 6 or so years ago when we started to get an idea of like trying to make a New England style IPA. We really didn't do it very well the first time, but and the second time we tried it was our Goodwill Hoppings, which we love and is a huge crowd pleaser for us, but it doesn't turn out really hazy. It just is less hazy than the rest of the beers that we make. But all the biotransformation and all that sort of stuff, we just didn't understand it at that point. And then we started doing small batches left and right. And the recent bloom that we have was the idea of trying to make a year-round beer. So we've been, for years before Radio Haze, been doing limited release beers. Like we had Hop Off the Press, 50 Shades of Haze. If you don't know now, you know. Juicy IPA, a bunch of crazy weird IPA, and a lot of them just were only available in the tap room because we only did them as side batches because we were just trying to figure out what worked. And then I started doing a lot of different stuff to try to quantify like what we had to have and what we wanted to get and what we needed to like cut off as far as costs and stuff like that. And that basically became Radio Haze. So we are kind of late to the party on the mass scale, but only because we really wanted to nail down what we wanted to have for a year-round beer. But we had been releasing hazies for years before that point. So it hasn't always been on the back burner or in the mindset, but it has been, since it's been relevant, it's been a thing that we've been interested in and been looking into.
Thank you, Chad. Now, John, I'm going to put you on the spot. Terrence Sullivan, Sierra Nevada, says John Harris is one of my brewing heroes. Now, we can't let that slip by.
Yeah. Come on, Terrence, come online. Show your face. He's got a good beard, too. Or used to. And I've known Terrence Sierra for a long time through MBAA and stuff, and he's a great brewer, too. And with Steve, who used to be their former brewmaster, Steve Dressler, and just really, I mean, I'll say the same thing about Terrence. I mean, him and Steve and Bart and those guys were just cooking out some just inspirational beers for years that, if we could make a beer that tastes as good as Sierra Nevada, that was, we were pretty happy with that. Because they've only gotten better. They got bigger and better. Some people get bigger and worse, but Sierra's actually, their beer is better than it's ever been. I mean, this hazy little thing's 2 months old, and it tastes just fine. Just fine. So, thanks,
I
Terrence.
have to say, Terrence, I've been with John twice now on interviews, and you've made him squirm more than I have. All right, yeah. John, we're going to let you run to the next question. Tim asks, are you using any hop products to supplement a portion of the traditional dry hopping?
Not at this time, no. We've we had this beer we were supposed to make last year. It's a long story, but the whole beer was going to be called IO, Experimental Ipa. And the whole idea was we were going to do nothing traditional. We were going to use oils and extracts and no pellets, no whole leaf hops, just and it just never, for some reason or other, just because of capacity constraints as we've grown, we had to we can't make that beer now because we need to make our flagship Starburst, and so once again that's got pushed off. But in my days at Full Sail, we did use Full Sail was one of the first people to make an IPA in Oregon actually year round, and all of our dry hopping we actually did was with hop oil, Challenger and East Kent Goldie, and so I worked with hop oils a lot back then. And we actually got a great aroma and flavor, different style of beer than West Coast or now hazies. But I think there's definitely a place for oils and other products like that. But we have not played with them at our place very much. But like I said, we were getting ready to. So maybe next year we'll bring IO back. I don't know. We'll see.
Dave, any thoughts there?
Same here. I mean, just cryo compared to traditional pellets, but I think that a lot of people are playing around with that. But I'm looking at I think maybe like even as recent as 5 years ago, I think a lot of people would look at oils and be like, oh, well, that's what the big brewers use to cheat, and I think that that's starting to change as far as how that's being perceived right now. That it's not just a mash of whatever they have left over, and that's what's making that oil. That you can actually get specific brand oils now, and can save you a lot. And especially for breweries like me who don't have the funds to have a centrifuge, this could be a way to save volume and make sure that we're getting our full batches out of there instead of having all these hops soak up a lot of the beer that you're trying to sell.
I mean, in the early days, there was such a backlash to, in the 80s, when I started brewing, it was like, hop oil, hop extract, evil, pellets, well, they're okay, kind of, but, whole leaf's better. So, but it's interesting now that, especially me as a brewer now, I'm like, what the heck, let's try it. I mean, the purity part of craft brewing is kind of, I think New England IPA kind of threw that out the window and said, hey, we're going to do something different. We're going to biotransform, and we're going to put out beers that look like milkshakes. And I think that type of stuff has really kind of opened my eyes as a brewer, just the fact that, hey, I made traditional 4-ingredient beers for years. What else can we do? So I mean, it's like I got my brewers come to me and say, how about trying this? I'm like, well, let's just go for it. Let's see what happens, because you never know what you're going to get if you haven't tried it. So that's what it's like, you think about brewing, it's like I've been doing this 30 whatever years now, 34 years, whatever. It's actually still fun. because there's so many things, and this whole hazy thing, and trying to figure out. And Chad obviously is delving into it. Whew. I look forward to some more one-on-one conversations with him. Actually, I'll be calling you.
Please do.
Pick your brain, but just I think that the world of beer is ever changing, and right now it's more exciting than ever. Really, I think that we're getting flavors we never had before, and we're trying things that before were just, I mean, you wouldn't do because it wasn't traditional, you know. And that's where the 80s and 90s where it was like being traditional. I like how we're untraditional now in the 2020s there, but that's what's my opinion.
Well, thank you, John. I think we'll give the next question to Chad. Chad, what are your favorite new hops to use in New England IPAs?
It depends on the situation. And I will stand by this if nothing else, that you still have to look at not the variety, but what the variety offers you as far as oils when you're coming down to New England IPAs or hazy juicies. If you're trying to utilize a lot of polyfunctional thiols or 3MH and stuff like that, then hops like Idaho 7, which we haven't used in a single production beer yet, but it's the single highest amount of polyfunctional thiol activity that you can find on the market. Hops like Equinox, which I was soured on for quite a while, and I just thought wasn't delivering on the promises that it was advertised as. It has a huge amount of offerings for that polyfunctional thiol characteristic. Hops like Pato, things like that. If you want to try to go into that realm, you can make amazing IPAs with those 3 hops alone, and just really crush it with like a passion fruit characteristic on it. But if you're trying to go for more of the pineapple-y, mango sort of characteristic, then Citra and Mosaic are great staples, and yeah, they are redundant, but they work. Azaka works pretty well. But to be completely honest with you, they're like, we do hop selection for a reason. We go up, and this year we did it virtually, of course, but in years past, you go up because you have different stats from different types of hops. Like when I would go up to Pacific Northwest to select our hops, I would test probably 12 different cuts of Amarillo. And all of them have different stats, all of them different characteristics. You just rub every single one, they all smell completely different. So, to say one type of hop is going to be the go-to hop for something is not the way the hop world works. It's a living thing. And year to year, it has variations. Crop to crop, it has variations. When we selected our Amarillo this year, our first, second, and third choice all came from the same farm, and they were distinctly different. So they're on the same exact farm. There's different lots across from each other, and they had different characteristics to it. So I can't really say there's like any 1 or 2 or 12 hops that I would say are like the absolute go-to. There is some continuity to, like, Citra hops. It's gonna have some good linalool in it. It's gonna have some decent geraniol in it. So like you can assume that sort of stuff, but your percentages are gonna vary. So I mean, as far as the go-to payload that we have in stock that I would go to all the time, Mosaic's definitely up there. Amarillo, Citra, Centennial, Cascade gets no love in the hazy game, but is an awesome hop for it. And one of my favorite hazy beers I ever done was mostly that. Mandarina Bavaria is great in it, and then even the weird ones probably like Equinox and like pepper and some like something like Columbus or CTZ just to bump up the 3MH. Just to influx that passion fruit character. It should be really good. But there's also some hops too that you have to look at that are like boosters. You shouldn't try to use Columbus as your only dry hop for a hazy IPA, but you can use it in a little bit of an accent to really accentuate the other stuff that you have going on. So I think the best thing to do is just trial and error on it and try to get as much information as you can, because honestly, those little biotransformative oils are going to really make the difference. And seemingly every year we find out new ones that play a factor. So,
all right, we have a little less than 15 minutes left, and there will be a hard stop. So we've got 7 questions to go through. I think we're going to have to kind of go through them pretty quickly. So, John, I'm going to give you the next one, and we're going to really just get one answer each so we can rip through these. Silter asks, how do we protect against and avoid hop burn? This is for you, John.
Gotcha. I guess I need to understand what you mean by hot burn. That's not a term I'm familiar with, to be honest with you.
I think it's like the odor from
okay.
hopping.
And I think overly bitter.
Yeah.
That when you get too much alcohol and hops, you can get this just unpleasant.
Add less hops? No, I think it gets down to the hop selection, really. And there's certain hops that are going to throw different, Chad's gone in depth about the different compounds in hops that affect the flavor and taste. But I know that, for a long time, it was all about, what was it, I'm spacing right now. Cohumulon was a big hot word in the 90s.
Yeah.
And, oh my God, watch out for cohumulon. It's intense bitterness and stuff like that. So, but I think that is real. Some hops that have high cohumulon will give you a bit more of a harsh bitterness than ones that won't. But, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question fully.
Okay. We're going to give the next question to you, David. The next question is, if you're not adding bittering hops, can you shorten the length of time in your boil, or maybe not even boil at all?
That's an interesting question. It's not what I would recommend doing. We always do a 90-minute boil for at least for everything that we do here. We'll go a little bit longer if we're trying to get a quicker Maillard reaction or something like that. But we just like to get everything out of the grain. We want to make sure we got no DMS that's going to be hiding in anything. We want to make sure that we just get everything, and we want to make sure that we're still making the beer that we want to be making. So I'm sure I've heard of lots of low boil, no boil methods. I haven't. It's not anything that I've experimented with, but it's not anything that I could recommend based off of my experience.
Well, it's Terrence. That's Terrence Sullivan without a ponytail. It's sad he cut it off, but
yeah, I almost got fired for that, John.
Did you really?
Yeah, he almost fired me for that one.
I got Zoom calls and showing them kind of losing a bit of hair up here.
Yeah. Miss you.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys, great topics. Really good stuff. I'm actually gonna tell all our brewers to listen to this one tomorrow. So not that we're going to steal anything, but, it's like the brewing community learning a little bit from each other, right?
Absolutely.
For sure.
So,
awesome.
Cool.
So
Go ahead.
Terrence, can you introduce yourself? Because maybe not everybody knows you by face.
Yeah, so my name is Terrence Sullivan. I work at Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. Doug and I are good buddies, and I like watching his program here and like to listen and learn. I've been with Sierra Nevada for 26 years now, and hopefully another 6 to get me to retirement.
I'm sure I'll make it.
So Terrence, you might have a comment on hazies, and if I switch over to the camera, this one is yours. And do you want to make a comment on your hazy? I'll go back full screen. You might not be able to see it.
We never really consider our hazy to be a true East Coast style. We just kind of call it a hazy IPA because it's hazy by our standards. I'm drinking this, which is usually has some snow globe floaties in it, but once you pour it, it's crystal clear. A comment that came up earlier that you guys were talking about, that little bit of like West Coast IPAs and how Charlie Bamforth, I think, did it right, where he showed a couple years ago 2 side-by-side pints. One was filtered and one was unfiltered. Which one would you actually drink? And I think us as all brewers would drink the filtered one 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, without a doubt. You kind of question the hazy one. But when, nowadays it's like I'm intrigued to see what's in there because you never know what that, in my opinion, what the haze is holding on to. And it really just makes them fun and exciting. You guys are all touching on those points. So
I love that
you guys
term.
go back to doing your show and not try to steal something.
Hijacker.
I wanted to say hi to John. I miss him.
Well, meet
terrible.
Chad and Dave. They're awesome. So
nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice meeting you too.
Thank you,
We
Terrence.
won't talk about what happened in Montreal, will we? Right,
No,
Terrence?
we won't. No, we won't.
Okay, good.
Okay.
That was an epic MBAA conference. It was.
Terrence, you're welcome to hang on. We'll keep going through the questions, and you might have a comment. The next one goes to Chad.
Hey, Doug. Hey, Doug.
Chad,
Pardon me. Wait. I gotta hop off now because I have a company Zoom at 6. So I just want to say thanks
Terrence,
everybody.
you can answer. You can answer John's questions.
Yeah,
maybe.
Thanks for come on, high five, Terrence. Come on. Yeah. But hey, this has been awesome, Doug. Anytime you want to invite me, I'm more than willing to participate. And I think you're doing a great thing here at Brewing Gourmet. Thank you very much, and all you guys too, Dave. Hope you get your beer, Chad.
Cheers, John.
Right.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Thank you for doing what you do.
Right. Cheers, guys.
Well, Terrence, since you're going to hang on, we'll give you the next question.
Don't make it my question.
Oh, well, would you start to try and answer it?
Yeah. So I actually submitted a question because I wanted your guys' opinion. We haven't worked with it, but the Kavik yeast a little bit. The ones we've done, we've only done a few in very high temperatures. We're pushing the 90-degree range, 80 to 90, depending on which ones we've done. But we felt like the shelf stability of them has really dropped off pretty quick. And I know, like a lot of these beers, we should be drinking them fairly fresh. Obviously, we with national distribution, we got to worry a lot about shelf stability with our beers. So it's just I don't know if you guys have experienced that. So I'll let you answer that maybe.
Yeah, tough for us to say, as it's not anything that we dabble with greatly as far as distribution. My main, Chad, I think you mentioned you weren't the greatest fan of Kavik yeast for these. I would say that one of the things that draws me away from using it in this style is that it does affect the mouthfeel quite a bit, and I think it does dry the beer out quite a bit more and leaves it a little bit drier. And for me, that's something that I'm looking for more in like a West Coast style and not necessarily in a hazy. That I'm looking for something just slightly sweeter, slightly thicker, and it's just also something that's just, I don't know. I can't always put my finger on it. I'll call it just like weird, and it's just something that I'm not always a big fan of. That I think there's great examples of it out there, but something that we haven't been able to have a great success at our brewery.
Yeah, and then to build off of that, like I really tried to try every single Kavik yeast-based beer that I could possibly come across. The majority of them are IPAs. The best ones I've had are not IPAs. They're ambers, or they're trying to be like some sort of a Belgian beer. I've had maybe 3 IPAs that I thought were good that were using it, and I didn't see, even though they were really good IPAs, they didn't have. I would not have seen the validity of using Kavik yeast aside from the shorter fermentation profile over using any sort of other yeast for it. And then I have had a very large amount of them that I did not care for at all. And I think that is from the phenolic characteristics that they tend to produce. And I don't know the fermentation profile of every one of those, but the couple that we've tried through, they never made it to shelf stability. And we were still them pretty high. The other big problem that I have with it is, like, we have a rhythm with our scheduling. We produce predominantly ales. We do really love to do some good lagers and stuff like that. We actually won a GABF medal this year for our Maibach. And we've been trying to step in the lager range well, but most of our beers run off of an ale schedule. Thank you. And the Kavik yeast honestly just doesn't fit in the schedule very well. As far as, like, we could get it done really quick, but it almost screws up our packaging plans and all that sort of stuff to have a beer that's ready to package within 1 week versus 2 weeks from when it is. So it's one of those beers that we just never really found one of value to do anything with, because we were already happy with what our normal yeast were doing for our IPAs and everything else for that matter. And also it's just such a weird anomaly as far as how fast it ferments and how fast it's ready to package, that we've never gotten to the point where we can even really shelf test it. So
right.
I would love to play around with it, but the best ones here locally I've gotten was actually a former employee of ours who has a brewery up in Concord. He did an amber ale with it, and it really worked really nicely, and it holds up well. But I feel like a lot of people are using it for an IPA accentuator, and I've been mostly miss instead of hits on the ones I've had from it personally, but that doesn't really mean anything as far as the validity of the yeast.
Terrence, I'll send you an email. I have a case of various Kavik beers that were packaged that are actually 4 months old. Now, they're refrigerated the whole time, but they are phenomenal. And it's a brewer in Long Beach, and I will connect you to.
Okay, cool.
We'll move to our next question if we got an answer for you there, Terrence.
Yes, you did. Yes. Perfectly fine.
All right. Terrence actually asked this question, so Chad, I'll give you this one.
All right.
We have noticed very low shelf stability with Kavik yeast, if you guys have seen it. So I think we've answered that one.
Yep.
Gary asked the next one, would hazy techniques help make a better Hefeweizen? Great question. Who can take that one?
You guys go. This is your show. This is your show.
Dave, you want to go with that one?
Yeah, I think the techniques that we're using to make good Hefeweizen are some of the techniques that we're using to make hazy IPA. With grain selection and pH and all those things taken into account. And so I think that you're kind of yeast selection, of course. So I think that they kind of go hand in hand, unless you guys disagree with any of that.
Nope, I don't at all.
No, I think you're right on. I mean, I have a feeling that, I wasn't there when they were making some of the first East Coast IPAs, but definitely that, big, wheat and now oats and those kind of things that are used in them. But, I've always found some of the best Hefeweizens are, 50-50 wheat and, some sort of pale malt and just the right yeast and the right characteristics.
I think your biggest deal with Hefeweizens is, one, you need to split 50-50 wheat malt with your base malt. But the biggest thing is having the right temperature for your yeast. I really think that's the biggest deal, because when you're looking at like hazy IPAs, you're looking at the interplay between substrates in the grain, the substrates in the yeast, and substrates in the hops, all interplaying in this great harmony. Whereas with a wheat beer, you're really just looking at, you're using a unique type of wheat profile in the grain, and you're using a unique type of yeast that is very favorable to a certain specific fermentation profile. And I feel like a lot of people high shoot their temperatures with fermentation on a wheat beers. When you look at a lot of the traditional wheat beers that we've looked into, at least, they actually go a lot lower in temperature, in the low 60s for initial fermentation. And every time we've done one, we started off at like 60 to 62 degrees. We let it free rise, and the yeast really takes that beer to a different level, because you can make a banana sherbet out of it if you want to, or you can make it this nice nuanced beer that the wheat just accentuates at the same time. So I think that the grain addition from ideology from like the hazies could apply to it, but I think you really need to look at like temperature allocation to really make the yeast do what you want it to do, depending on what you want to do for the Hefeweizen.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that kind of, to me, a perfect Hefeweizen has got that just great balance of clove and banana and not that over banana.
It shouldn't be a banana sundae.
Nope.
Right?
Nope.
Hey, Terrence, I'd like to put you on the spot for the last 60 seconds, just because I think you could quickly summarize. What do you think the future of hazies is as a style? Do you think it's another black IPA, or what do you think?
I'd really like to see it turn into a really nice drinking Pilsner. But that's not going to happen. I think, I truly just the flavor, the aroma and the taste and the flavor and the, I think the drinker now is really moved on from, unfortunately, from the West Coast IPA, the aggressive. But I think us brewers will tend to like that a lot. Sure, it still has its place, but definitely that kind of easier drinking. I think the sweetness that I find in a lot of the hazies that I enjoy
10 seconds.
is perfect. Okay, so yes, I think it's here to stay. It's not going away.
Okay, is a hard stop. Cheers, everyone. Thank you for doing this. I
Chad,
don't want it
David,
to end
nice meeting you.
unceremoniously,
Nice
so thank you, everybody. Audience, bye-bye.